Okay, I just need you to know that this is very much out of my comfort zone. And yes, I was a teacher for 33 years, but you know, I knew more than those kids, but I don't know more than y'all do. And I wasn't afraid of the kids, and yes, I'm pretty nervous this morning. However, you know, when I was in college, speech was a requirement. Oh, I just dreaded that class so much. And I put it off and put it off until I couldn't put it off any longer. I took it my very last semester in order to graduate. And it wasn't so bad. And I did make an A, but it's still not the top of my things to do. I don't like talking in front of people. Okay, as I mentioned last week, I kept telling Janda she needed to find someone else. She asked me back in July, and it took me a while before I decided to do this. So finally, so that she would not hound me anymore, I told her I would. But almost every time I've seen Janda, I've told her she needed to find someone to take her place. And she says, no, you'll be fine. Even as late as yesterday, I was trying to think of some reason why I couldn't do this. But then I got texts from several people, several friends saying they were praying for me. And I thought, no, I'll go do this. And even this morning, several of you have come in and said, you know, I've been praying for you. I'm looking forward to hearing you. My life is pretty ordinary, and this is going to be a fast 75 years, okay? But before I begin speaking, well, I need to say this. I'm not going to do anything where you're going to cry. Now, I may cry just because I'm up here. And there's going to be some things that I think are funny. You may or may not. In our lives, we have not had any serious illnesses. Okay. Yes, we've been in the hospital, but nothing very serious. And we haven't had any real tragedies. The closest thing to a tragedy was a car wreck that we had several years ago, and some of you might remember that. But no one was hurt. You know, we just tore up the car. We had bruises and scrapes and some bad memories, but nobody was hurt. So, but before I really begin talking, I've asked Jill to lead a couple of songs that have special meaning to me. Now, I did tell her that I can think of a whole bunch of songs that would take up the whole time, and she said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. I'm just going to leave the two. So, oh, what's wrong? I'll say. That's the reason I asked Jill to lead the scene. Yes, I sing, but okay. But as some people say, I sing so low you can't hear me.
Oh goodness. Okay, we're gonna start with Heavenly Sunlight, and we're singing all three verses. I asked her, I was like, do you want to just sing the first? No, let's sing all the verses. Okay. Walking in sunlight on my journey over the mountains, through the deep vale. Jesus has said, I'll never forsake thee, promise divine that never can fail. Heavenly sunlight, flooding my soul with glory divine. Hallelujah, I am rejoicing, singing His praise. a friend we have in Jesus.
What a friend we have in Jesus, all our sins and griefs to bear. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. Oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear. All because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. Have we trials and temptations? Is there trouble anywhere? We should never be discouraged. Take it to the Lord in prayer. Can we find a friend so faithful, who will all our sorrows share? Jesus knows our every weakness. Take it to the Lord in prayer. Are we weak and heavy laden, covered with a load of care? Precious Savior, still our refuge. Take it to the Lord in prayer. Do thy friends despise, forsake thee? Take it to the Lord in prayer. In his arms he'll take and shield thee. Thou wilt find us solace there.
You gotta come back up.
Now it's 11.
Oh,
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Many of you have known me for a long time because we've lived in Lubbock for almost 41 years. So most of what I'm going to talk about is before Lubbock. We moved to Lubbock in 1982, but I'm going to start somewhere else. Okay. I didn't start out as an Arkansas hillbilly. That came later. I was born in Fordyce, Arkansas, which is a small town in south central Arkansas. I was the oldest of 4 siblings. Only one other sibling was born in Fordyce. The others were born later. Coach Paul Bear Bryant, the legendary coach of Alabama, played football for the Fordyce Redbugs in the 1930s. Before my time, I didn't even know that he was from there until much later. But that's Fordyce's claim to fame, Coach Paul Bear Bryant. Okay, Redbugs is another name for chiggers. If you know, you know. Another side note, many high schools in Arkansas have very unusual names for their mascots, besides Redbugs. Okay, Dardanelle Sand Lizards. Okay, Conway Wampus Cats. Morrilton Devil Dogs. Atkins Red Devils. And last but not least, Mariana Porcupines. Now, if you listen, you're probably going to hear some of these names later. Okay. One memory that I have that stands out to me, a first memory, is at the church in Fordyce. I remember standing in front of the auditorium, in front of, there were probably maybe 50 maybe 50, maybe 60 people there, not many. And that was before I was scared of speaking in public and reciting the books of the Old and New Testament. I didn't sing the song. I just said the names of the books.
Wow.
I was probably 4, and I couldn't do that now. Another vivid memory was singing number 75, What a Friend We Have in Jesus. It was led by W.H. Burnett. I even remember his name. And I checked recently on the internet, and that church is still active in Fordyce. It's probably not in the same little building, but it's still there. Okay, my dad was the youngest of 9 siblings, and he was born on his mother's 43rd birthday. Okay, just compare that to what the doctor told me when I was pregnant with Sarah. I was about 30. And he said, "You're getting pretty old to have a child." My dad was born on his mother's 43rd birthday. Okay. Since he was the youngest, all of my first cousins, except for one, were years older than me. And I did get to know and spend time with several second cousins. You know, there's a saying, your cousins are your first friends. I don't know if you've heard that before. I've always heard that. My mother was an only child, so therefore there were no first cousins on her side of the family. But I did know several second cousins and spent time with them. Because my mother was an only child, you know, family was a big thing to her, and she couldn't believe that my dad's family never really got together. So sometime in the 70s, she planned their first family reunion. And it continued every summer for several years. I think the last one that we had was in 1987. Well, this past August, we had another one. And there were people there that I know I'd never seen before. And there were, counting myself and my 3 siblings, there were 6 first cousins there. But, you know, it was a fun time. We reminisced and we ate, and it was in Russellville, Arkansas, and it was outside. It was very hot. Okay. My maternal grandparents almost always lived near us, and so they were a great influence in our life. My grandmother had rheumatoid arthritis, and she experienced considerable pain and limited mobility. However, she never complained, and she was always happy. And Heavenly Sunlight was her favorite song. And she lived believing what it said. And that's why we sang that song this morning. Thank you, Jill. We moved to Camden, Arkansas, which is not too far from Fordyce, when I was 4 or 5, and that's where I started to school. Church was a major part of our lives, and we were there every time the doors were open. I know a lot of you were the same way. My other grandparents lived near Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and we visited them fairly often. Their home was out in the country. The living areas, and this was an old house, the living areas were separated from the bedrooms by a hall that was open at the front and the back of the house, known as a dog trot. And of course, there were no inside bathrooms. The bed that we kids slept on was kind of reminiscent of John Denver's song, Grandma's Feather Bed. And in the winter, we slept with, you know, lots of quilts and hot water bottles to keep warm because there was no heat in the bedrooms. The only thing that heated the house was on the living room side, and it was a big fireplace. My journey to becoming a hillbilly began in 1956 when my dad accepted a job in Russellville, Arkansas, which is very near, and some people say in the Ozark Mountains. And my parents continued to live there until they died in 2007 and 2018. I attended school in Russellville, 3rd grade through 12th grade. And a special memory from church was the night that my brother and I were both baptized. It was during a gospel meeting, as they used to be called, and most communities had one every summer. I was 12 and he was 10. And after our baptism, I remember my parents taking us to A&W root beer. And good frosty mugs of root beer. I don't remember for sure, but the visiting preacher very likely could have been Jimmy Allen, I know Jan English mentioned him in her talk. He was a hardy Bible professor, and sometimes he was known as a fire and brimstone preacher. And the invitation song was always "Just as I Am," at least 8 to 10 verses. Seriously, you know, we just sing it over and over and over again. When I was 14, my family, along with a few other families, decided to plant a new congregation in Russellville. For the first year, because we didn't have a building, we met in the American Legion hut, where there was a dance and drinking every Saturday night. So lots of Sunday mornings, we had to go early and clean the building before we had church. The congregation grew and was eventually able to build their own building. However, there was no youth minister, but we had a fairly large youth group, and we were pretty active. We did things together. And one of our favorite things was to attend youth rallies. I don't think they're called that anymore, but in surrounding communities. And in 1964, several of us decided that we wanted to plan a youth rally for our congregation to host, and the elders supported that. I know it's hard to believe, but 59 years later, that youth rally still goes on. And it's now called Christ Teens, and it happens every February. And there are teens and adults from all over Arkansas and other states that attend. And now it's more than just one day, it's a weekend thing. So anyway, that was pretty special. Many of you may know Terry and Judy Richardson. Terry and I attended high school and church together after his family moved from Texas to Arkansas. And his future wife, Judy Taylor, lived across the Arkansas River in Dardanelle. Remember Dardanelle sand lizards? And Judy and her older sister, who you'll hear about later, were part of our youth group. My brother still lives in Russellville and attends that congregation, and he is one of only 2 original members that are still there. After graduating from high school in 1966, I enrolled at Harding College, which is now Harding University. I met Tim when we were both freshmen. He was sitting in a Harding swing, you know what the LCU swings look like, well, Harding swings look just like that, with a good friend of mine, and he was about to ask her out. I walked up and she introduced us. He did not ask her out, and the rest is history. We were married during Christmas break of our senior year. So we dated for almost 3 years. And yes, I would say I broke up with him several times, but we always got back together. After graduation in 1970, we moved to Memphis, Tennessee, and I enrolled in medical technology school, and Tim worked at a Firestone store. I want to give you some information about Tim before I continue. He grew up in West Tennessee, and for several years, his family lived with his grandparent on the family farm. His grandmother taught him to sing, and he was fairly young when he led singing for the first time with his grandmother sitting on the front row. When he was 16, let me back up a little. His family moved to Marianna, where he finished high school his junior and senior year, you know, Marianna Porcupines. So he was a porcupine. When he was 16, he had the opportunity to lead singing for several gospel meetings that were held around Marianna. And he continued to do this while he was in college, during the summers while he was in college. And he led singing for several gospel meetings where Jimmy Allen was the speaker. Okay, a few months before Elizabeth was born in 1972, we moved to West Memphis, Arkansas. There's another river crossing. It was across the Mississippi River this time to West Memphis, Arkansas. We were soon adopted by Jack and Annette Baldwin. If you've been here for a long time, you might remember who they are. At that time, they lived in Arkansas. And our best friends were the youth minister and his wife, who happened to be Judy Taylor's older sister. But the youth minister and I went to school and to church together, and we all attended Harding at the same time. And very often, because we were friends with them, we helped them with youth activities. Tim led singing, and this is where I began teaching cradle roll. This is also where I had my first experience teaching in a Christian school. Believe it or not, I taught kindergarten for 2 years at West Memphis Christian School. For most of his adult life, Tim has been in some type of sales and Firestone tires, Wonder Bread, private label bakery items, radio ads, cars, electroplating for auto parts. If you don't know what that is, you can ask me later. Sears maintenance agreements and Little Debbie snack cakes. We have moved several times to pursue jobs opportunities. We moved from West Memphis to Russellville in 1975, and Rachel was born here in 1976. We attended the same church that I had been a member. Tim led singing, and I taught cradle roll. There was still no youth minister, so we often helped coordinate activities for the youth. There was one young lady that often came with her boyfriend to our activities, and later she was chosen as Miss Arkansas and then became Miss America. So you know, I knew personally a Miss America. We moved from Russellville to Ripley, Tennessee in 1977, and Sarah was born there in 1978. Tim led singing, and I started a cradle roll program. For 3 years, I worked in the lab at the small hospital in Ripley. When I worked on Sundays, Tim would get the girls ready for church and then bring them to the hospital for me to fix their hair. He couldn't do that. Tim often made up rhyming names to help him remember people's names. The minister's wife name was Irene, and Tim's name for her was Irate Irene. He didn't mean that derogatory. That was just, just kind of flowed off your mouth. Irate Irene. So one evening, Irene brought us dinner, and as she was leaving, Elizabeth said, "Was that Irate Irene?" We don't think that she heard us, but we never used that name again. We moved to Jackson, Tennessee for a family business opportunity. Elizabeth and Rachel attended Jackson Christian School. And if you remember Jerry and Jennifer Lawrence, that's where they are now. They're at Jackson Christian School. I taught cradle roll, and occasionally Tim led singing. Ultimately, the family business didn't work out, so we moved again. The Baldwins, who now lived in Lubbock, encouraged us to come to Lubbock to look for work. Our friends, the youth minister and his wife from West Memphis, were coming to LCU for the annual Youth Ministers Conference, and so we hitched a ride with them. Tim stayed to look for work, and I went home to wait for him to find a job and then ultimately pack. We've made many special friends through Green Lawn. I don't need to say that yet, I'm sorry. We moved to Lubbock the week of Thanksgiving in 1982. And an interesting side note, Audine Baldwin, some of you may remember Audine. She was Jack Baldwin's mother, and she worked at LCU. And we had our first Thanksgiving when we moved here in 1982 at her home, and that's where we now live. Tim had secured a job, and I went back to work in a hospital lab and then a private lab. We placed membership at Green Lawn without ever visiting any other congregations. I taught cradle roll for many years for Doris, Judy, and Pat. Tim taught 4th and 5th grade classes for a few years and led singing occasionally. Tim, this is not his first job, but Tim went to work for the Sears Maintenance Agreement Office. That's the same thing as like a maintenance agreement is like a service contract. Okay, and lo and behold, Louise Price worked there. And she and Tim became friends. And then we were friends with Theo, and we've been friends with them for 35 plus years. And we're so thankful they moved to Greenlawn. The girls were students. Okay, I'm sorry. I keep skipping things I wanted to say. After Tim worked for the Sears Maintenance Agreement Office for a couple of years, he had the opportunity. He had always wanted to do this because he knew other people who had done it. He became a distributor for Little Debbie's snack cakes. And that was fun for a while. You know, we enjoyed eating Little Debbie's. And, you know, we all had our favorites. And then we got tired of them. But the girls' friends, when they would come over, they always knew where the Little Debbie's were. And we said, here, you know, take whatever you want. And so they did. We don't eat Little Debbie's anymore. But it was a good run for Tim. Okay, the girls are students at Lubbock Christian School, and I began working at LCU to help pay the tuition for them. I had never planned or wanted to be a teacher. The kindergarten thing was not really being a teacher. It was more just a playtime, I think. But I decided that it would be best for me to have the same schedule as the girls because Tim was working long hours out of town. So I began taking education classes at LCU. And in 1987, Ricky Harmon took a chance and hired me to teach junior high science. I was there for 33 years. I taught junior high science, junior high girls Bible, high school chemistry, and my last few years, I was the academic counselor. I was there with my 3 girls. I did not teach Elizabeth, the oldest, but I had Rachel and Sarah in class. And the first year that I had Rachel in class, I had her in 7th grade, and then I had her again in 8th grade. The first year, you know, she never said anything to me. And the second year that I taught her, she'd raise her hand and say, Mama, Mama. and so, you know, I enjoy being able to teach them. My 3 grandchildren were at Lubbock Christian School. I never taught any of them, but just being there was a blessing for me. And they said it was for them too. At a small private school, or really just any small school, you wear lots of hats. Okay, I was assigned to coach junior high girls basketball, volleyball, and track, but I had never ever participated in any of those sports. But I did it. And for a few years, I was the junior high cheerleader sponsor. My only experience with cheerleading was when I was in the 7th grade and I tried out for cheerleader, but I didn't make it. That was the only experience I had. I've always considered my time at LCS as a ministry, and I have many special memories. Looking back at our time here at Greenlawn and at Lubbock Christian, we've made many friends, and they're like, so many of them are like family. And we've enjoyed traveling with them, camping with them, and going to sporting events and eating out. That's a favorite thing. In the meantime, while all this is going on, after 17 years with Little Debbie, Tim needed a change. So he enrolled at West Texas A&M in the alternative education department. And he became a special ed teacher, and he did that for 14 years. He always said that being a special ed teacher fit him really well because he probably should have been in special ed when he was in school. I don't know if that's true, but they probably didn't have special ed when he was in school. Okay. I've never thought of myself as a risk taker, but in 2010, Tim talked me into going on a trip to the Northwest, 35 days on a motorcycle. Several years later, I agreed to go to the Grand Canyon on a motorcycle. So, you know, that was looking back on it, after we got back,
Yeah.
it was lots of fun. When I thought about where all we'd been. One thing that's really neat about riding on a motorcycle, you got a 360-degree view. So, it was neat to see everything, but you could also smell everything. The skunks, and you go through a town where they're frying chicken or cooking hamburgers, and you smell that grease. But it was fun, and we have been blessed through the years to travel with family and friends, and we've been to, I think, 44 of the 50 states. Another thing that some of you know this about me, but most of you don't. Back in the day, and I didn't start till I was about 55, I started running, and I ran 10 half marathons, and I attempted 1 marathon, and I made it 19 miles. And then they made me get on the bus. Our girls grew up, went to LCU, married remarkable men, and they're the parents of 9 outstanding grandchildren. And I could talk for 45 minutes about my grandchildren, but I won't. Okay, I haven't said much about my parents, but I'm so thankful that they were hardworking, godly parents who taught their children about Jesus. Neither of them had more than a high school education, but it was so important to them for their children to get a higher education than just high school. So we all did. I have a brother who's a chiropractor, a brother who's a physical therapist, a sister who's a speech pathologist, and I still consider myself a medical technologist, although I haven't worked in a lab in many, many years. But I got that degree, and then I also became a teacher. So they were very proud of all of us. Through our journey, we've always relied on God to lead us and provide for all of our needs. And I'd like to close with one of my favorite scriptures. Lamentations 3:22-24. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion. Therefore, I will wait for him. Thank you.